we have the two extremes of corporate behaviour, and it matters enormously, because either we face a future where bad behaviour grows in scale and people are exploited and human rights are virtually ignored, or we have the spread of decent behaviour by business in which people's conditions and their minimal rights to a hearing and to an adequate standard of living and decent treatment in health and education, etc., that is recognised and supported. We have therefore two alternatives, two extreme alternatives. There are positions in the middle, I know. At one extreme, we can argue that providing a lot of attention is given to the guidelines for corporate social responsibility, then companies themselves can expect to grow in, well, public influence. They can begin taking over certain activities which previously have been thought to belong only to democratically elected public bodies who have to regulate or have to own or have to provide some of the basic social services. On the other hand, we've got the extreme of saying, well, voluntary codes of behaviour are not likely to make very much headway. They're important because at least they convey to business leaders what others expect of them, even if they have very little time to reflect on those things. The contrary argument, which derives a lot from 19th century history in Europe and North America, is that voluntary codes of conduct are of limited value and consequence, and sooner or later we have to recognise that it would be best to revise national company law and to try and spread regional law either in Europe or North and South America, South Asia, or even to reach a position of international company law where there are particular rights and responsibilities placed on all business companies or corporations. I tend to take that position, but for the life of me, I can't see that happening for 20, 50, even 100 years. There are real difficulties of harmonising national law. There are real difficulties politically of empowerment for that process of democratisation of company law to take place. Some people advisedly should be exploring that particular course of action. I think in between these two extremes, it is possible to argue for tactics on particular issues. It's almost like arguing a thin end of the wedge argument, that if you get something going, that later on things will improve a lot. Let me give you an example which I only came across when I was last week in Geneva. I found that the Commission on Human Rights 4 years ago had issued a statement about economic, social and cultural rights, the norms on the responsibilities of transnational corporations and other business enterprises about human rights. And this is a very dignified statement of great interest to those activists in human rights. And for example, in the introductory pages it says, and I've got it here, and forgive me for quoting it because it's quite a good document. noting that transnational corporations and other business enterprises have the capacity to foster economic well-being, development, technological improvement and wealth, as well as the capacity to cause harmful impacts on the human rights and lives of individuals through their core business practices and operations, including employment practices, environmental policies, relationships with suppliers and consumers, interactions with governments and other activities. Now, that to me was a very central statement of the responsibilities that leaders of businesses which affect millions of people really need to be reminded of, even if they're not educated into an awareness. Let me just give two quotations from action that follows from recognizing that you have to not undertake activities that could be harmful. One is that, I'm quoting from paragraph 6, transnational corporations and other business enterprises shall respect the rights of children to be protected from economic exploitation as forbidden by the relevant international instruments and national legislation, as well as international human rights and humanitarian law. So there's a nice link to the needs of children. And that, of course, raises issues to do with child labour, as well as children's enjoyment of standards of living in health, education and the rest which they deserve. The second quotation is as follows, number 8. Transnational corporations and other business enterprises shall provide workers with remuneration that ensures an adequate standard of living for them and their families. Such remuneration shall take due account of their needs for adequate living conditions with a view towards progressive improvement. Now, I don't think many people are aware that the Human Rights Commission has sponsored quite sharp statements about the activities of transnational corporations, which really had direct implications for the wages that they provide and whether they have responsibility at subcontracted or subsidiary level, if I dare summarise it like that, which poses all the questions that arose in the history of the industrialising countries in the 19th century, of whether the wages paid at least bought survival and a decent standard of living, what people did to protect themselves if they fell sick or became disabled as a result of business machinery. Now these questions that now have to be raised again and applied to the workers directly employed from headquarter transnational companies right through to those countries which have in which those corporations are operating. And I think part of the problem is that there's a formal workforce and an informal workforce, and we have to then move into questions that affect the two, because if conditions are improved and wages improved only for the formally contracted workforce, then the companies may act to reduce those numbers and make it even more informal and exploitative. So unless we take a holistic or an overall or comprehensive view right from the beginning, we may not by those sort of steps achieve a great deal. But what I'm trying to argue is that if the spread of those human rights instruments can be accelerated, let's put it that way, and we use particular examples, such as the needs of children. And I take here extreme child labour for those under 12 years of age as a good example. If we could concentrate on beginning to make improvements which are written into, signed up to, by transnational corporations, I think it does them a service as well as the rest of us.